All right, we are now recording. Welcome everybody to today's OLLI Brown Bag Lunch presentation. It is September 22nd and it is this term's second brown bag. It's great to see everybody here. We have a really exciting topic for today. But before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about OLLI and OLLI programs for those of you who are new. Or if you wanted to describe OLLI to your friends or family, here's some very useful info. First, for this presentation, we will begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Cal Poly Humboldt is located on the unceded lands of the Wiyot people. Arcata is known as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. We honor them and all our neighboring tribes by our ongoing commitment to developing trusting, reciprocal, and long-lasting partnerships. Here at OLLI, we believe that learning should never end. OLLI is a program that creates opportunities for academic engagement, civic involvement, personal growth, and fun for adults 50 and better. Right now you're at the Brown Bag Lunch presentation, and this is just one way OLLI provides learning and community to members and non-members alike. And thank you for being here today. For those of you who are not familiar with OLLI, OLLI is a membership-based program for lifelong learners aged 50 and better. OLLI hosts one-time or series classes that includes topics in history, science, music, technology, art, and exciting trips to local businesses and outdoor activities and more. Including this weekend, we have a walking tour of the murals of Eureka that's happening with Bob Doran. Membership costs is $35 annually, but if you are current or retired Cal Poly Humboldt staff or faculty, it is $25 a year. Membership runs from July 1st through June 30th every year and must be renewed each year to stay active. Classes are open to all adults aged 18 and over, but non-members must pay a $25 additional fee per class. Some of the membership benefits for OLLI include lower class fees and first priority registration. You get Cal Poly Humboldt email access, which gives you access to a bunch of different free softwares. You get a discount on the Jack Pass, eligibility for course scholarships that we have here, student discounts at local businesses with your student ID card. You can participate in our OLLI special interest groups. We have one tonight with Elizabeth Morrison for the Eureka Symphony. You get access to the library, gym and recreation center access with a small fee, and you get invitations and reminders for OLLI events like our open house and like brown bag lunch presentations. Oopsie. And if you want to stay up to date with OLLI without necessarily becoming a member quite yet, you can go and visit our OLLI newsletter and sign up. It is located at humboldt.edu/OLLI. Click on the purple button that says subscribe to the OLLI newsletter. Fill out the form, and then every Monday morning you'll get updates on OLLI events, classes, and programs. Like I said before, brown bag lunch presentations are every Monday from 12 to 1:30 p.m. They are facilitated by Jane Woodward, longtime OLLI member and our curriculum committee member. And these are short informational presentations from the Humboldt community members and Humboldt friends. So every Monday, feel free to invite some friends and join us. If you want to check out our previous brown bag presentations, you can check them out on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@OLLIHumboldt, and there we have an archive of all of our old brown bag presentations. And this one will be included in that. It should be uploaded later on this week if you wanted to check it out or share it with a friend. Another program we have here is Let's Connect. It's a free weekly chat via Zoom on Fridays from 10 to 11 a.m. These started because of COVID-19. It was a great way to have people stay connected, just to talk, stay, as community members. And then it was so popular after the world started opening up back again, people just wanted to keep doing it. So every Friday morning, there is a lovely hour-long conversation featuring a different discussion, different topic every week. And Tracy Barnes-Priestley is our instructor for that. And if you're interested in signing up, you can go to humboldt.edu/olli/let's connect, and you can sign up for it that way. There is zero fee for this class too, and it's not really a class, it's more of a group meeting. And if you have any questions about OLLI, our classes, our programs, anything that comes to mind, please give us a call at 707-826-5880, or you can email us at olli@humboldt.edu. And without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jane Woodward, who will introduce today's guest for today. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you here on our second presentation. This is a novel kind of presentation we haven't had before, and we're delighted to welcome Galina Vromen, who spent more than a decade as a reporter, mostly for Reuters news agency in Europe, Mexico, and Israel. After retiring, she harnessed her writing skills to release her debut historical novel Hill of Secrets, set in World War II Los Alamos. The research sparked her interest in the aftermath of the use of the bomb, and she has become well-versed on issues of nuclear arms today. For more about her and her book, you can visit her website, galinavromen.com. And we had an interesting conversation before this all started, and she told me a little bit more about her history, and I invited her to please do that further because she's had an interesting life that is a background for all this history. It's all yours, Galina.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to meet you. Are you all hearing me? We all good?
You're good.
Okay. So I was a journalist indeed for a long time. I worked mostly out of Israel, was very interested in nuclear policy being in that part of the world. It's very difficult not to be somewhat concerned about nuclear weapons, as we know from
Yeah, this is Carol. Hi.
hi, are we good?
Hey, if just as a quick little update, if you have your microphone off mute, please go ahead and mute your microphones. Thank you.
So I worked in that part of the world for a long time, was interested in nuclear policy from as far back as I remember myself, really, from the 70s, I would say. And then I was also when I retired, I worked in journalism for for a long, long time, and then lived in Israel for a long time as the head of um, two early literacy programs with the Arab in Hebrew and Arabic. And so have spent half of my adult life there. When I retired, I had been working on this novel for more than a decade. I was interested in the whole issue of secrets and families, the idea that we sort of know things and we sort of don't at the same time. And things are not always elaborated in families, and you don't there are things that are somewhat hidden, or there are elephants in the room, and that kind of fascinated me. And I wanted to write a book that focused on that idea. And then I was talking to a friend who's an American historian, and he mentioned to me that he had a student who was working on her thesis had been on the wives of scientists at Los Alamos, and what whether they had known or not known why they were in Los Alamos while the bomb was being built. And so I said, well, did they or didn't they? And he said, well, they sort of knew and they sort of didn't know. And that really fascinated me because it really spoke to what I had been interested in about families. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to juxtapose the two things together? And so I decided to do a book that would have major characters, each of whom had a secret that they were, you know, that they were carrying, but that it would be set in one of the most secretive places of the 20th century. And so I wanted to juxtapose those two things together, and that's how Hill of Secrets kind of came to be. Jane had asked me about the process. So I wrote it for 12 years. I was very lucky that the first agent I contacted took on the book. It took about a year for her to find a year and 27 rejections to find an editor to take it. And I think I fell into very good hands. I have to say that the whole experience from there on in was quite incredible. Um, I worked with amazing fact checkers. And I tried really hard to be, the journalist in me wanted to make this as historically accurate as possible. But, if I cited a song on the radio, because one of the ways that I keep people abreast of what's happening in the world is through the characters are listening to the radio, but there's songs and she would say, yeah, well, that song was a hit that year, but it's not by the group that you have singing it. And so they really, it was fact checked from here to kingdom come, basically. And the process was really amazing. And it came out about a year ago. So basically the story takes six major characters and traces their life from the time Los Alamos. I hope that some of you have seen the movie Oppenheimer. When the movie came out, I was really freaked out because I'm thinking, oh my God, this blows my book. Nobody's going to take my book. And in fact, I think it actually helped because until then, people thought Los Alamos was in Texas. Like when I would say Los Alamos, writing a book about Los Alamos, they thought I was writing about something in Texas and they had no idea what I was writing about. After the Oppenheimer movie was in the making, that became much better known. And after I saw the movie, I felt really reassured because the Oppenheimer book, the movie really focuses very much on the scientists and the politics. And I was much more interested in focusing on the families who did not know why they were there, for how long. And it's a different kind of heroism and one that, in our bringing forth history, a history of women that has been ignored for many years. We sometimes do ignore the fact that for a lot of women, their endurance and their resilience and their heroism, the fact, had to do with their ability to adapt to situations and basically were expected to follow their husbands to wherever their professions took them and to adapt. And so this is much more about that adaptation at that time, which I think was typical of a lot of the women that ended up in Los Alamos. Los Alamos had been a boys' school, a boys' boarding school. Oppenheimer, who had spent time in the area because he was, as a sickly youth, had been sent to that part of the country, liked the area. The army took it over, and in 1943 started building housing for scientists to come and be there. So between 1943 and 1945, the population there went from essentially almost a couple dozen people to 6,000 people. And of those people, about 2/3 of them were families. There was also the engineering corps. There were also the Women's Army Corps. The people who did a lot of the manual labor, the maids came from nearby Pueblo villages. They were Native Americans. There was quite a substantial Latino population that also did a lot of the manual labor. The construction and that sort of stuff. And that was done, and many of them lived in trailer parks that surrounded Los Alamos. So that's the kind of the configuration. And I will start, I'll show you the book, first of all. Stop the share while you can see the title there. But I'm going to stop the share for a moment. And this is the book itself. I will start by reading a little bit from the book, and I'm going to start with Christine, who arrives at Los Alamos with her husband, Thomas, who's a chemist, and she had started going for a PhD in chemistry. Her husband got a fellowship in London. They went off to London. They ended up in New York. She parlayed her knowledge of chemistry into a business in art restoration and had just sort of started this business when her husband was given this opportunity to go off on some project which she doesn't know very much about. The point at which we will meet her here is they have arrived in LeMay, which was some distance from Santa Fe. They've been picked up by Jimmy, who's with the engineering corps, who has driven them to Santa Fe, where they got their housing assignment. This is, in fact, the process that happened normally, and they have been on the very steep road going up to Los Alamos. They have gone through the initial security at the entrance of the base, and they're now driving through the base. There is a reference to Opie, who is Oppenheimer. That's what everybody called him. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book. First stop, Site Y, otherwise known as the tech area, Jimmy said. Off you go, Dr. Sharp. The officers in that booth there will want to see your security pass again and will direct you to Opie's office. I'll make sure the missus is okay. He took a hand off the steering wheel to salute, then extended it to shake Thomas's hand. It's been a pleasure, sir. Thomas threw a glance back at Christine. You'll be okay? Sure, she smiled bravely. Will you know the way home? Good question, Thomas laughed. Don't worry, said Jimmy. Anyone can direct you to the Sun units. They're walking distance. And at the Suns, people will know your apartment. Only one unit was empty, and everyone's been waiting to see who gets it. Thomas hopped out of the car and stopped a moment at the back window to give Christine a peck on the cheek. He squeezed her hand. Wish me luck, he said. With a start, Christine realized that Thomas was nervous, intimidated even, something she had never seen before. Brilliant was the adjective normally used in conjunction with her husband. Although he was not arrogant, she knew he did not consider it inaccurate. I guess this is big, she said. She was still as baffled as she had been since those letters started arriving in New York as to why his expertise in developing high-resilient coatings could be of such importance to the war effort. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, and he shrugged. I think it is. She realized suddenly that maybe even he didn't know exactly why he had been summoned here. Good luck. She squeezed his hand and let him go, proud to see him walk purposefully toward the security booth and into the inner sanctum of the exceptional, brought together to try to win this horrid war. Jimmy stepped on the gas, and Christine tried to memorize the route as they turned right, down one unpaved road and left on another. All around, she saw construction sites and flimsy houses scattered like a trail of shoeboxes, their fresh green paint and corrugated tin roofs already dusty. She had never noticed before that dust had a smell. She wondered if there were as many varieties of dust smell as there were of mulch in her native Maine. Would she learn to discern them? Women with strollers struggled to push their charges through deep, rutted roads. Others trudged along, looking defeated by the heat, loaded down with net bags of groceries in each hand. The women were all dressed in dungarees and sported neck bandanas, apparently high fashion in these parts. They wore workmen's boots, sneakers, or sandals. None wore pumps like hers. On a balcony, a cluster of women chattered, laughing over tea or coffee, and Christine was surprised to find at the flash of longing she felt. Could they be future friends? In her experience, with small remote places, chattiness was cattiness. What were the chances things would be different here? The sound of nails being pounded into clapboard created a sense of bustle and newness. It felt as if, when she woke the next day, she might find herself in a town constructed overnight by leprechauns. There were telephone poles on the side of the road, but she noticed that no lines ran between them. Anybody have a phone in this place, she asked. Only the director, and only in his office, Jimmy said. The poles were put in place, but then the security guys decided it was better not to let folks have phones. Christine didn't like these security guys, whoever they were. Jimmy stopped in front of a two-story unit with small windows and front balconies. You're in the apartment upstairs, he said, opening the door of the Chevy for her. While she stared at the steep wooden stairs, Jimmy pulled out the suitcases, duffel bags, and packages from the trunk. He nodded at her to lead the way, but she let him go first. She was curious to see her new home, but as long as she stayed in the street, maybe she could still drive away to New York, to Samantha, to restoring antique furniture and old paintings, to new exhibitions by upcoming artists, to Broadway plays and walks in Central Park. Jimmy made his way down and up with more luggage, sweat pouring from his brow. This time she followed him up the stairs. Standing on the landing before the door, She looked around at the tangle of children's bicycle in a lot between the buildings. The clothesline across the way fluttered with t-shirts of every color and size. Another line displayed only diapers. Did everyone here have children? Sand scratched her throat. Let me get you some water, she said to Jimmy as he walked past her into the unit. She followed him in and headed into the sunny kitchen. After opening and shutting the white cabinets until she found glasses, Christine turned on the cold water tap at the sink. The water was warm, slightly brown. She let it run. Don't do that, said Jimmy. No wasting water. But it's brown. That water takes too long to run clear to waste it that way. You probably want to be boiling the water you drink until your body gets used to it, he said. How long does it take a body to get used to the water, to this place? So here we kind of are introduced to Christine's dilemma, which will accompany her throughout the novel. And I really, Los Alamos was a place where people really worked hard and they played hard. There were extremely talented scientists there, the creme de la creme of American universities, but also a lot of refugees from Europe, most of them Jewish refugees. Enrico Fermi, who was Italian, he was not Jewish, but his wife was, so they had left Italy. And Edward Teller, who went on to, who was Hungarian, and a lot of others. And they, some of them were musicians, they had quartets. Edward Teller ran a radio program for children on Sunday afternoons, which I desperately tried to get into the book, but somehow every scene I tried to do about that didn't work out, so it got kicked out. Oppenheimer was actually in one of the, participated at least in some of the theater. They did, they put on a production of Arsenic and Lace, and he was the dead body at the end of the production, at the end of the play. And I tried to put that in the novel, but then I thought, well, this is like, nobody's going to believe this. I mean, sometimes fiction is stranger than fact. And so that ended up not being in it either. But that is one of the challenges of writing a historical fiction, is you get so interested in the history that you have to make sure that it always serves your plot, and that it's not the plot serving the history. So that's to give you a little bit of a sense of what my novel is about. But I really, after writing the book, I became more interested in what has happened since the war. First, really, I became interested in the decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, more Nagasaki than Hiroshima, whether the second bomb was really necessary. That was my first question, but it deepened from there. And I will share with you a little bit of how that. So I want to get into a little bit about the motivation for.
Oh, don't forget to do your full presenter mode.
Yeah, I think I'm
Sorry.
not going to do that because then I can see what I'm doing better. I can try it, but in my experience, I'm trying to do slideshow. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to. I always have trouble with keeping the from current slide. All right, we'll see. So see, that's what happens. It goes where I don't want it to go. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit. Basically, what we're going to move from here is from the book, which was my sort of beginning point of getting interested in the topic of what's happening, what has happened since, and how did that very important historical event that introduced us to the atomic age, what developed beyond that. So the first thing is, why were the bombs used? And ostensibly, and not ostensibly, but the first reason that has always been there is to assure Japanese surrender. That was really the point, and to save American lives. There were two other major motivations. To prevent the Soviets from joining the fight against Japan by invading Manchuria. The Allies, particularly the US and the Brits, were not interested in the Soviets having extensive influence in Asia after the war. In other words, they did not want what happened in Germany afterwards, where you had East Germany under Soviet control. They were not eager to have the Soviets share in the bounties of victory in any defeat of the Japanese. At the same time, the Soviets, um, the Japanese were very afraid of the Soviets. And after the Germans surrendered in May of 1945, the Soviets, who had had a non-aggression pact with the Japanese, had suspended that agreement in in April of 1945. And when the Nazis were defeated, the Russians said that they would come into the war against Japan. Now, this really scared the living daylights out of the Japanese. They were very, very afraid of the Russians coming into Manchuria, and the Allies saw this as helping in the fear of the Russians joining the rest of the Allies in defeating Japan was something that they saw as a big positive. At the same time, they didn't want necessarily them to actually do it, because then they would share in the victory. So it was a kind of a dance that was going on. And the other issue was what would happen after the war. And Truman, in this regard, was very, very much influenced by his Secretary of State, James Burns, who really did believe that America could be the top gun from a diplomatic point of view after the war if they could show that they had this very powerful weapon, and it would give them a lot of leverage against the Soviets. So those were factors that also played in. And as more and more information has become declassified, I think the weight of those second two reasons becomes a little bit more dominant than it may have been, say, in the 1950s, when people talked about why the bombs were used. The fact is that by August of 1945, there was a very successful blockade on Japan. The Japanese did not have fuel for their aircraft. So they could not respond to any Allied bombing. They were out of food. They were an island. They didn't have enough rice. They were eating acorns because they were so hungry. And the military, the US military essentially believed that and particularly the Navy, that the Japanese were on the verge of surrendering. The Emperor of Japan had in fact sent a delegation to Moscow, I believe it was in June, to ask to feel out the possibility of a surrender. Now, the emperor was very scared of the Allied demand for a unilateral, unconditional surrender of the Japanese. The emperor in Japan has the position of a semi-deity, and the term unconditional surrender was interpreted by the Japanese as meaning that the emperor would no longer have any power, that the form of government that the Japanese had would no longer be allowed to continue. Now, from the Allied point of view, the Nazis were one thing, but the emperor at this point was a part of it was to save his skin, but it was a larger issue for the Japanese to not lose their emperor. And the Allies, and again, Burns, with influence on Truman, did not want Truman to drop the word unconditional in any of his dealings with the Japanese, that it was going to be an unconditional surrender. And that was really holding the Japanese up, because they really didn't want to lose their emperor. Now, there were also elements within the Japanese army that were, they were going to commit harakiri. I mean, they were not going to allow a defeat under, they did not want to surrender, because that was a matter of honor in their culture. But my sense is that the emperor could have very well carried the day in the end, and he did in fact carry the day in the end, because he had such he was revered And he was considered, his word was so important in the context of Japanese culture. Now, I don't want to, in saying this, I don't want to in any way diminish the fervency with which the Americans, um, or let's say not the fervency, but the fear of the Japanese as warriors. They were intense, uh, ruthless, fought to the end. They, being a POW of the Japanese was absolutely horrendous. And so the idea of saving American lives and not exposing more soldiers to that is definitely a powerful, it was definitely one of the considerations. And a final consideration, and I think this was mostly for Groves, who was Oppenheimer's boss, was to know whether both kinds of bombs worked, because the bomb used on Hiroshima was a uranium bomb, was known as Little Boy, and the bomb used on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb and was known as Fat Boy, and much heavier. And the plutonium bomb was actually what was tested in July. At the Trinity test was actually of the plutonium bomb. But with that, there still remained, because it was such a big bomb, there were still a lot of questions about whether they would successfully load it onto the bomber, whether it would be able to, when it was released, would the trigger actually work in real time? And when, what would be at what point would the trigger be released? And all these kinds of questions were still very unclear about this very big bomb. And so there was, I think, some curiosity on his part, and maybe on some of the scientists, to know whether this thing really would work in real time. So we have the situation now, the idea of how many Americans' lives were saved. This is something that, again, people who grew up in the 50s or 60s, the common narrative was that it saved 1 million American lives. And I want to sort of question that narrative from the reading that I've done on this topic. And I'm going to, let's see whether I can successfully. Okay, so it's a complicated slide, but I will take you through it slowly. And this is according to a book, The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb by Gar Alperovitch, which is a really thick book, but really excellent. He leaves no document unturned. I mean, it's quite remarkable. But in August 9th I wanted to, before I do that, I'm going to go back a moment. Let me stop the share for just a moment. I want to go through the sequence of events of how it actually happened with the dropping of the bomb. Hiroshima was, Truman got information that the Trinity test had been successful while he was at Potsdam with Stalin and Churchill. And at that point, his kind of stance, the fact that this thing really worked, made him a little cockier vis-a-vis Stalin, and he was very sort of he also felt he had to, because the Soviets were allies, so he couldn't really keep the information from them, but he didn't want to give out too much. So he sort of over lunch said to Stalin, well, we've tested this incredibly powerful weapon, and it's really successful. And Stalin sort of said, well, I hope you'll have an opportunity to use it. And then they went on and kept eating. And that was kind of the degree to which the Americans notified the Soviets of what was that they had this weapon, and that essentially Stalin did not stand in the way of its being used. In fact, Stalin knew much more about the weapon than Truman had an inkling of, because there were spies at Los Alamos, but the Americans didn't know that at the time. So you have Potsdam, and at Potsdam, Truman really does not, because the bomb works, he really does not want the Russians to invade Manchuria. Then the Russians say they were going to come into Manchuria in mid-August. So on the 6th of August, the Americans bomb Hiroshima. On the night of the 8th, close to midnight, the Russians declare that they declare war on Japan, and they announce that they're going to invade Manchuria. So that's close to midnight on the 8th. An hour after they announce that they declare war on Japan, they start moving troops into Manchuria. And several hours later, the bomb is hit, the bomb on Nagasaki is detonated. The Japanese cabinet is having a meeting to discuss the invasion of the invasion by the Russians and the bombing of Hiroshima when they are notified that Nagasaki has been hit. So the Americans were successful effectively in stopping the impact of a possible Soviet invasion and stopping it short. So that really the Soviets really had no leg to stand on of having some kind of occupation of Manchuria. And so now let's go back to this. Let me see if I can go back to. So now let's talk about the Million American Lives idea. So on April 9th, this is right after Nagasaki, Truman writes to the Manhattan, sends a message to the scientists at the Manhattan Project. And he, from a grateful nation, hopeful that this new weapon will result in the saving of thousands of American lives, and we feel a deep sense of appreciation. Okay, so here we have thousands of American lives. Several months later in December, he addresses what is today considered the Washington Press Corps dinner. And he says at that dinner, it occurred to me that 250,000 of the flower of our young manhood was worth a couple of Japanese cities, and I still think they were and are. Okay, so it's the number has changed from thousands to 250,000. Between 46 and 47, MGM did a docudrama called The Beginning or the End. Now, at the time when you were doing a docudrama, you did have to get the permission of living historical figures to approve the text of what the actors playing their part said in the movie. And the text that Truman approved was that he had been told by the military that a year less of war would mean life for 300,000, maybe 500,000 of America's finest youth. Not only that, but it will mean life for untold numbers of Russians, Chinese, and of Japanese. Now that reference to the Russians, Chinese, and Japanese, the Russians and Chinese is in that it forestalled a Russian invasion of Manchuria. Now, so here the number has grown, and what Truman is referring to here, what is being referred to, is that the military had a plan B. If the blockade of Japan didn't work, the plan was in November of 1945, a kind of a Normandy-like invasion of Japan. That was supposed to happen in November of 1945 if the Japanese had not surrendered as a result of the blockade sooner. So there was talk of a much larger land incursion, but basically the top brass of the military and the Navy did not think that would happen because they thought the Japanese, without Hiroshima and Nagasaki, before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they thought the Japanese would actually surrender before, because all this mission that the emperor had sent also to Moscow, the Americans knew about it because they had broken the encrypted code of the Japanese. So they knew everything that the Japanese were thinking and doing at that point. So here we see that by 47, the number has grown from 250,000 to 300,000, maybe 500,000. And then in 1948, in a speech in Toledo, Ohio, he said that the military had advised him that the use of the bombs would save 250,000 young Americans from being killed, and we would have an equal number of and would save an equal number of Japanese young men from being killed. Again, here this is reference to the consequence of a launch in November of 1945, that the use of the bomb forestalled that need. Now, we need to take into consideration that in all of World War II, it cost 500,000 American lives. That was the total casualty figure, death figure of Americans. So the idea that it would cost the same as everything that it cost from the time the Americans entered the war until May of 1945 or not May, until July of 1945 to defeat the Japanese further is a large number. Now, in May of 1940, now what happened in 1947 was that let's go on to 49s. He tells us his biographer, Jonathan Daniels, who had been he was a had been the spokesman for Roosevelt. He had been an aide to Truman when Truman first started. And he tells Daniels that Truman says he had asked Marshall and Eisenhower how many American casualties invading Japan would involve. Again, we're talking how much would that proposed November 1945 invasion would involve. And he was told that it would take 1 million men for the landing and 1 million to hold it. And that such a landing would involve 500,000 casualties. Again, because of the ferocity of the Japanese. But so that is the figure cited. Now, in 1953, there is another historian who contacts Truman about and asks what happened at Potsdam, what was he told by Marshall, and about this plan. And what Alperovitz discovered was the first draft of Truman's response to this professor. And in the first letter, in the first draft, it said that he told Kate that it would cost a 250,000 casualties. And then there is a note on that draft letter from one of his aides that said, this contradicts Stimson and Harper's. Stimson, who was Truman's Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, had written an article in 1947 in Harper's, and that was very, very widely publicized, in which he used the number that it had saved 1 million American lives, that he had been told that it would save 1 million American lives to use the bombs. At this point, you already have some people who are questioning the use of the bombs, a bit of an understanding of how much it had cost and the issue of the morality of it. So there was a more defensive posture about the use of the bomb, though not very defensive. Basically, America felt it had the right to use it and that it was the right thing to do. But Truman did not want to find himself contradicting his own Secretary of Defense. So he told the aide to change the letter, and the letter that finally went out said that it would cost a minimum of 250,000 casualties and might cost as much as 1 million. So he adds and might cost as much as 1 million on the American side alone, and an equal number of the enemy. So we've gotten to much, much, much higher numbers here. And then in April 1959, when he's addressing students at Columbia, he mentions that it had saved 1 million lives and that he had no regrets and that it had been the right thing to do. So that was how that narrative became cemented in the American mind, that it had saved 1 million American lives. Now, there's certainly, you can argue that if it saved 10 American lives, it was worth doing. You can say, it's like it's a numbers game. Like, was it worth saving 1,000 American lives, 10,000? How many American lives? But the point is that the narrative has changed over time. The idea that it really saved 1 million American lives when all casualties of the war up to that time had been 500,000 on the American side does seem to be a rather large number. And to me, it also was fascinating to read all of this because we think of history as fact and fiction as fiction, and you can see where the two kind of merge. That here you have where do the facts end and where does the fiction and all this begin? The fiction and the narratives that we tell each other. So that's a little bit about how that all came about. And then I think that what I want to sort of get into from there is what happened after the war. So Burns had believed that that America would have a diplomatic diplomatic leverage over the Soviets for at least a decade by being the only power in the world to have this very powerful weapon. In fact, the Soviets did their first nuclear test in 1949. That's when the Americans learned that the Soviets actually had a bomb as well. And the reason they had a bomb was that they had stolen, they had spies in Los Alamos that had provided them with the information so that they could build it much more efficiently than the amount of effort then went into the American building of the American bomb. And let me go back to sharing. Hold on a moment. Sorry. Let me see if I can. No, I don't want to go to the end. Hold on a moment. Sorry. This is why I don't like to do it this way. Hold on, I'm sorry, I have to stop the share. Get into my. Okay. I'll share that, and I'm going to keep the Okay, I'm going to keep the stuff next to me because then I can see what I'm doing better. So the first nuclear bomb was tested in 49. In 52, you have the first hydrogen bomb is developed by the Americans. Now at this point, a lot of the scientists who had been at Los Alamos were very much against the development of the hydrogen bomb. Not Edward Teller, who developed it, but the scientists, Oppenheimer among them, really thought that perhaps by sharing technology with the Soviet Union before 1949, that we really could have avoided the intensity of the Cold War. Maybe he was right, maybe he wasn't, a little hard to know. So you have the hydrogen bomb in 1952. The Brits and the French also develop atomic weapons as part of NATO. And at that point, the situation was that the military in the United States had some 200,000 people involved in various aspects of nuclear weaponry, but they were in the Navy, the Air Force, and the and land and military and the Army. And they decided this whole thing kind of needed to be organized better. And so what you have is in 1960, they look for a single integrated operational plan for general nuclear war. So this is known as PSYOP, and it was they took about 1,000 experts who worked for months and months and months to how they would coordinate between the three branches of the army, of the military, and how they would make all this work and what would be the strategy. And this was what they came up. So the operation, they convened all the brass and all the who's and who's and all the people who needed to know in a bunker in Nebraska with huge charts. And I have a photograph of it, but I'm not going to put it on because I don't know what the rights are. So if this is a recording, I don't want to violate any photo rights, but with charts and screens and all kinds of whatever the visual aids were of the time. And it had two basic aspects. The one was that the idea that there was going to be launch on warning. America was not going to wait to be attacked by the Soviets. And you're talking now, we're heavily into the Cold War at this point. Launch on warning. The minute the America knows, our warning system lets us know that a Soviet missile is on its, a nuclear missile is on its way, we launch our nuclear weapons. And our warning, the most sensitive, the most important warning stations are in Alaska and in California. So you don't have a lot of time between the time you get the warning and the time you launch. And the other thing is that when Truman, after Nagasaki, he decided that leaving the decision to launch nuclear weapons to the military was, you couldn't trust them, and therefore only the president would have the authority to launch on warning, to give the order to launch a nuclear weapon. And ever since then, ever since Truman, in fact, there has been what's known as the football, which is essentially a briefcase that is carried around by a military attaché everywhere that the president goes. There's always a military attaché there with the briefcase, with the codes and the procedure for launching a nuclear weapon. So that was one aspect of it. The other was that they were going to have a triad approach. And this is the integration. And you see that the idea is that every branch of the military will have its role. I assume that you're all seeing the CEOP integrated launch system. I hope that that's all showing.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
we are.
So it had there were static land-based missiles. And then, so that was for the army. Then there were bombers that would carry. Now, the static land-based missiles are the ones that would be launched on warning. They're essentially sitting ducks because it didn't take long for the Soviets to know where they are. People in the area where they are know where they are. One would expect that you would have probably some Soviet spies living not nearby who watch if there's any activity going on there. And they were the ones that they were constantly ready to go. So they're constantly staffed and ready to go. And then there would be bombers. It takes a couple of hours to load weapons onto bombers. And you have refueling issues and so forth, so it's a little more complicated. And then there would be submarines. And the submarines are very efficient in the sense that they can be maneuvered. They are difficult to locate. The enemy would not know where they are. They can stay underground. The only reason they come up is when they run out of food because they have their own fuel source. So they can stay underwater for months at a time. And move wherever they're needed, wherever danger is perceived, to get themselves in position, and are much harder to attack than bombers. And the estimate, they're talking and they're explaining how all this would work, and the estimated initial death toll of our response to a launch would be that we would kill about 325 million people immediately, and more or less the same number. Basically, a total of 600 million people would be killed with the after effects of the fallout and all that sort of stuff, and casualties, the deaths from injury, and that it would eventually reach 600 million within a few months of such a thing. So, and that many of those millions would not be, in fact, Russians, because a lot of the Soviet installations were near the Chinese border. So China, which was not, a big power then, would end up with millions and millions of people dead as a result of a confrontation between the Soviets and the Americans. And all the brass is going, good job, and wow, and it's really good. One guy stands up and says, this is pretty crazy idea. There's a little bit of science, and everybody ignores him. And this is basically the doctrine is really the doctrine of what's known as mutually assured destruction. And that is, the idea is that the Russians need to know that we will launch on warning so that they don't launch. And because we can all destroy each other, nuclear war won't happen. Now, the amazing thing is, and it's the acronym is highly appropriate, MAD. But the amazing thing is that the policy has kept us out of a nuclear confrontation, more or less, ever since. Mad as it is, it has more or less worked, but it doesn't provide exactly a lot of comfort. And the time when it was most put into question and when it almost really fell apart was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, the Cuban Missile Crisis is really interesting because another aspect of this whole idea of uh, of um, of mutually assured destruction is that there is parity between what the nuclear weapons we have and the nuclear weapons that the other side has. And I want to really question that, because if you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, in 1962, the USSR had 300 nuclear warheads, and the US had 5,000. And it doesn't really matter. Once 300 nuclear warheads is enough to destroy the world. The fact that we had more than 10 times the amount of nuclear weapons that they did not make us, in fact, safer. So the question of whether, when we think about nuclear policy, when we think about our nuclear arsenal, whether we have to have the same thing the other side has to have, I don't know. If I can kill you with a 1-pound bomb, do I need a 5-pound bomb? And so the China in 1964 acquired its first nuclear weapon. It is producing about 100 new nuclear weapons a year and plans to continue doing so for the foreseeable future. It's about 600 now. And the peak was in 1967 when there were 70,000 nuclear warheads, about evenly divided between the US and the USSR. Now, again, if you need 300 nuclear warheads to basically destroy the world, why you need 70,000 of them is just crazy. So that was there was a beginning of a recognition that maybe this was really too much. In 1968, you have a non-proliferation treaty with 190 signatories. Now, this is a treaty that has changed over time because there were countries, South Africa initially didn't sign because they had a nuclear program for a while, and then they dropped their nuclear program, so they did sign. The most recent kind of fluctuation here is with Iran, which is a signatory, but after the recent confrontation with Israel, has suspended its signature to the treaty. There is a possibility that it will go back and not agree, will take away, rescind its signature. If you look at who hasn't signed, you can see that it's India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, and South Sudan. And with the exception of South Sudan, those countries are all nuclear powers. Now, what does it mean to have signed this treaty? What are the provisions of the treaty? Basically, it says that if you do not have a nuclear weapon, you will not seek to get one. And if you do have nuclear weapons, you will not sell or share the technology of them with other countries. So that's kind of the provision. So basically, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea have not committed to not sharing their nuclear power with their nuclear know-how and technology or the weapons with whoever they decide they want to do that with. So from there, we move into a situation where there is some idea that we need to sort of limit things. So that there you get into the SALT talks. You have 1963, there are limits to testing. And agreements that have the L in them refer to limitations. When the agreements have R in them, it's actually reduction. So we moved from a situation of reduction of limitations to reductions. Now, the limits of the testing was very important because the testing of nuclear weapons was enormously destructive. I mean, the Marshall Islands, there were some that like essentially disappeared from these testings, and a lot of, when we talk about in addition, apart from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the most of the nuclear fatalities and casualties and illnesses have come from testing of nuclear weapons, including Trinity. So there were limits to testing, and in 1972 you have the first SALT agreement. You have which limits growth, technology. Sorry, it's not the first one. It's SALT 1, limits growth, technology, and defense system. Now, what happens is very interesting is that in 1983, PBS comes out with a movie called The Day After. The movie is seen by 100 million Americans. Remember, that was a time when we only had a couple of channels and people mostly saw the same thing. Reagan's aides, Reagan was president then, Reagan's aides did not want him to see it, but he insisted on seeing it. Gorbachev saw it as well, and it depicted what the world would look like after how a nuclear war would begin and what the world would look like afterwards. Dane, if you are with us, if you want to run the trailer for it just so that you get to give you a taste of it, that would be great. Can you do that? I
Yep.
don't know what
Can you guys see the screen?
Okay, so I should stop my share so that you can share.
Yes, we can see it, Dane.
All right, I'm going to play it right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I remember this.
159, Union Yesing, first tower, voice 6-1.
NATO intelligence sources report a massive buildup.
59, clear for takeoff, Ollie.
Clear ground.
Eastern post check none.
The president is presently in direct communication.
Privilege approved.
Three Soviet tactics deployed.
Current world intelligence situation, and you might pay particular note to the nuclear submarines off the east and west coast.
Having already captured NATO advanced positions.
Hey, any of you guys hear anything about an alert?
I really don't think either side wants to be the first to use a nuclear device.
It's not a question of who, but where.
East Germany sealed off the borders to West Berlin.
It's not gonna happen.
Four principal West German access corridors.
People are crazy, but not that crazy.
I don't believe this is happening.
We have a massive attack against the U.S. at this time, ICBMs. Over 300 missiles inbound now.
Either we fired first and they're gonna try to hit what's left. But they fired first and we just got our missiles out of the ground in time.
This is not an exercise.
One millisecond takes you beyond imagining, beyond tomorrow, and into the day after.
Okay, so that's thank you. So that gives you a sense of what the what this film portrayed. It's really just a very small sense of it, but you can see that that you have, you get the sense of what the world will look like after the chaos. A lot of the things that we've been talking about, either we have to get ours out of the ground first, the submarines are brought in. A lot of the things that I've been mentioning are touched on in this. So it really created a very realistic scenario of what a nuclear war would look like. And it also, for the first time, really talked about, it really showed what a nuclear winter would look like. This was something that scientists had sort of come to the conclusion that if there was indeed a nuclear war, the dust that would be generated by a major confrontation would be so thick that essentially it would block the light of the sun, not completely, but there would be much less sun coming to the earth, and it would basically be winter on Earth for 10 years, except perhaps parts of Australia, but in most of the world, you would not be able to grow food. There wouldn't be enough sunlight. So Reagan sees this movie and he says, well, we can't let this happen. And Gorbachev also is moved by this movie. And Reagan had the advantage of not dealing with a Stalin. He was dealing with a Gorbachev. Times had changed, things were different. So in fact, though we tend to think of Reagan in connection with Star Wars, he was actually very, very important in allowing the development of reaching for the first time the idea of a START agreement. So let me see if I can successfully share again. Hold on.
Do you lose the share button?
Oh, I think I'm okay. Let's see.
There we go.
Okay, good. So we have 1986, Reagan meets with Gorbachev in Reykjavik, and that leads to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force, which is the first reduction treaty. Now, in 1989, the Cold War ends. We go from the 70,000 weapons that we were in 67 that existed in 1967. The START Treaty reduces nuclear arms to less than half of that, to 30,000. Now the Russians at that point were in such dire economic straits that they did not have the economic ability. They just didn't have the resources to actually decommission their nuclear weapons. So under a very important agreement called the Nunn-Lugar Agreement, America said, you know what, we'll do it. Now, in terms of, verification that your enemy is doing what they say they're going to do, it doesn't get better than that. We essentially decommissioned the Soviet arsenal. And the nuclear material that was taken from nuclear weapons actually was used as fuel for our own nuclear civilian reactors for decades. So this was an incredibly useful agreement. It did cost us money, but basically we got all this enriched nuclear fuel to use for our own civilian needs. And we were able to ascertain for sure that the Russians were reducing their nuclear arms. Now, between 1992 and 1996, again, under détente and what was going on and the change in atmosphere, you have former USSR countries, including Ukraine, got rid of their nukes. And the idea was that these countries agreed to get rid of their nukes because the West promised them a defense umbrella, that they would fall under the umbrella of the West, under the protection of the West, against any possible Russian aggression in the future. And that is really the basis, if we look at sort of the situation today in Ukraine, of Ukraine's expectation and the commitment that Europe and America are supposed to have to Ukraine to defend it against exactly what is happening today. And it's hard to imagine, and I'm not sure, would the aggressiveness of Russia have happened did those countries still have nuclear war? Would it be less or more dangerous today if they had them? So I leave that as an open question, which I'm not going to try to answer. I don't really have the answer, and I think it really is a matter of speculation. But it is important to realize that this agreement, this 1994 denuclearization of Ukraine came with it with an obligation to protect Ukraine, and that is really the basis of what is going on today. Now, in 2010, you have a New START agreement, again, more reduction, further reductions. You're getting down to 12,000 nuclear weapons, with about equal on either side, and not all of those are they're in different levels of activation. Not all of the, only a fraction of those are sort of ready to go kind of nuclear weapons. That's under Obama. It includes on-site inspections, numerous ones every year. And it was due to expire in 2011. It was extended and it ends in 2026. And that is in fact the last agreement between the US and the Soviet Union and the Russians, and there's nothing around that's supposed to replace it.
I will interrupt briefly to say that I heard on the news this morning that Russia, despite the fact that it's going to expire, has agreed to extend it for a year.
Oh, that's
I
wonderful. I
literally
had
just
not
heard
heard
that on the
that.
news this morning.
That is really interesting. That is fascinating. I had not heard that, and thank you for adding that, because Putin has hinted that he would like to start, to continue these negotiations, because I want to go into what the implications of the end of this agreement, if there's none that replaces it. And that's wonderful news. That's really, really wonderful news. Is that there would be, it's kind of like this agreement is like, it's like you have a 65-mile speed limit and you have policemen monitoring the road. If you take away this agreement, there's no speed limit and there are no more policemen and nobody's monitoring it. So it doesn't mean that nobody has violated the 65 speed limit over the years. There have been some violations, but somebody has been watching, and the policemen are on the sidelines and they're on the inspections. And the result, and part of the agreement was that, and this I think is probably not affected by any extension, is that Obama did not have an easy time getting this New START agreement through Congress. And in order to do so, he had to agree that there would be a nuclear refurbishment program. And that nuclear refurbishment program is in process. So there is currently a huge hiring boom at Los Alamos, because Los Alamos remains the one place in the United States which can create the plutonium pits, which are kind of like somewhere between the size of a grapefruit and a bowling ball of plutonium enriched and uranium enriched balls that are used as part of the trigger system of the much, much, much more powerful bombs that we have today. And 1.7 trillion is a number that's a little hard to get our minds around, but that comes out, somebody did the calculation conveniently, and it comes out to about $108,000 a minute for 30 years. It's a 1.7 trillion 30-year nuclear refurbishment program. The fact that our nuclear arsenal is tired is not really contested by anybody. Whether we need to be spending $1.7 trillion on more nuclear arms, I think it could be questioned. The triad configuration remains. So though we've gone from a situation that was basically in 1960, where you had 4 nuclear powers, now you have 9 nuclear powers. The basic policy, launch on warning, the triad configuration with submarines, land-based and bombers is the same. There are 12 new nuclear submarines being built that are due to be built. We already have 14. I have read defense experts who say we probably don't need 12. We could probably be fine with another 8. The new nuclear warheads for decommissioned weapons is what the work at Los Alamos is about. Some of these decommissioned nuclear installations were actually turned into sort of parks that people could visit it, and they're being recommissioned basically. And these the land-based ones are based in Colorado, Nebraska, North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, which is called the nuclear sponge of America by defense. They're the ones that were supposed to absorb like a sponge the first nuclear attack. And I have read accounts by defense experts who say this is completely useless because today nobody really thinks that the Russians are going to launch a major attack on the United States. These missiles are sitting ducks in any case. They are, everybody knows where they are. Why do we even need them? And I just want to give you a sense of what they look like. So you see this here, you can see perhaps at the very top, there is a crane, if you can see that. And that is, a full-size crane, and you can see how many times you could repeat that to get down to the bottom. And that bulbous part at the bottom is really where the personnel sits, where you saw that in the trailer, the personnel moving all kinds of stuff, and that would be where they would be sitting on these things. And you saw at one point there's a bomb that goes off out of the ground, and this is what the installations actually look like. So that's kind of where we are today. I'm afraid this has not been exactly a really lighthearted, happy presentation, but I did kind of want to talk about, I wanted to give people a sense of the framework of where we are today and how we got there, and to ask, informed questions as the electorate, and to be aware of this. I mean, what to me is so ironic is that the whole situation of Los Alamos in World War II was it was a secret. I mean, Truman actually did not know about the bomb until he became president. As vice president, he didn't know about it, which is quite amazing considering there were about 600,000 people involved in various aspects of the Manhattan Project, and he only learned about it like a couple days after he became president. And the one of the big questions that has been asked about the whole refurbishment is how much of the money that's being spent is being spent on actual hardware, and what are we doing about preventing cyber attacks and accidents? Because one of the things that has happened more often than actual threats like the Cuban Missile Crisis has been almost an accidental triggering of a nuclear war. Gorbachev was said to keep a sculpture of a goose in his office because at one point our warning system interpreted a flock of geese as an incoming Soviet missile. The reverse has also been true. Sunsets have been interpreted incorrectly. There was a North Korean test, a nuclear test at one point that was misinterpreted by our system as a real attack because of a faulty computer chip that was easily replaced. So the idea that in all cases, in fact, it was human intervention of someone along the command line who didn't pass on the warning to his superiors in order to say, I need to check this further. This doesn't make sense for one reason or another. I'm going to assume this isn't real, because that has really prevented us in about half a dozen cases from an accidental nuclear confrontation. So that's really the hugely scary part about this mutually assured destruction policy. And I think the real danger of the end, if indeed this SALT agreement does not get extended or replaced, is the communication that you have between experts on either side. If you have ongoing communication, ongoing inspection, you have kind of different tracks that you can check with your colleagues on what the hell is going on, and what the intent is here. So I think I want to sort of stop here, except that I would like to take the opportunity to still read to you an end portion of my book. It's the second to last chapter, where just a small part of it, which is kind of the last moment of innocence. in that it's just when Hiroshima happens, and Christine, who we met earlier, goes to see her friend Gertie, who's a teenager, who's babysitting, and with her charge at a playground where the kid is swinging on the swing. And she comes over to see her and tell her what has happened. So I'm just going to read this. It's a couple minutes. Christine signaled to Gertie, who was babysitting 8-year-old Amalia, to come over to the bench at the edge of the playground. "What brings you way out here on such a hot day?" Gertie asked. Christine sat down. "It's hot, all right, but I had to come and tell you. The gadget. They used it on Hiroshima. It's all over the news. It worked." "Hiroshima? Who's that?" "It's a city in Japan. They used the gadget on the Japanese. President Truman just made it public. The bomb was released overnight. The news was broadcast over the loudspeaker system. Truman even mentioned all the people who were involved in developing it. Everyone on the Hill is going crazy. Relieved, excited, making reservations for dinner in Santa Fe to celebrate and waiting to hear more details. I knew you wouldn't hear anything out here." Above them, birds chirped in the aspens and the breeze blew steady, unperturbed. "So the gadget was a bomb, just like we always thought," Gertie said. "Yes, an atomic bomb." "What's that?" "Powerful, more powerful than anything the world has ever seen," said Christine. "Truman said it was more powerful than 20,000 tons of TNT. He didn't say anything about the casualties yet, but we'll hear of them soon enough, I suppose." Gertie looked at Christine. "Was there a battle?" "No, there wasn't any fighting, but there must be a lot of civilian casualties." Gertie nodded, absorbing this information. "Aren't you happy that the gadget worked?" she asked. "I want to be happy for Thomas, for your father, for everyone else here, but an atomic weapon means radiation." Christine stared at the horizon as if she were imagining that bomb. She sighed heavily and looked back to Gertie. "It doesn't just kill those it strikes. It poisons everything around it." "It does?" Gertie asked. Christine looked at Gertie, then looked down and bit her lips several times, as if weighing whether to continue. Gertie had never seen Christine so distraught. "Tell me," Gertie said. Christine sighed deeply. "An atom bomb, releasing as much energy as Truman indicated, kills people by burning them from the inside, slowly and painfully, for days, for weeks, even for months." Her voice drifted off. "Are you sure?" "I studied chemistry, remember?" Christine said. Gertie glanced up at the sun and tried to imagine this bomb that burned people from the inside. She couldn't. People at Los Alamos were good, Papa, Opie, all the others. They wouldn't want people to die the way Christine said. Maybe Christine was exaggerating. Gertie glanced over at her charge, who was pumping away, feet reaching for the sky. "I should get back to Amalia," Gertie said. "You should," Christine sighed, and got ready to get up. "Nothing we can do about the casualties, but wait and hear how bad they are. I should go wash my hair and get ready for the festivities." Gertie nodded and returned to Amalia. Suddenly, everything seemed so fragile. Instead of feeling good about finally knowing what Jimmy and Papa and all the others had kept secret for so long, she felt confused. Did the bomb harm people the way Christine said? But wasn't that a good thing if it led the Japanese to surrender and saved American lives so that no more soldiers would die? Amalia was wriggling off the swing. "So did you reach the sky?" Gertie asked. Amalia smiled proudly. "Almost." So I'm going to leave it there and open up for a few moments of questions. I went on a little longer than I wanted to leave more time for questions, but I'm certainly open to extending however long you want into whatever questions you have. So
John
thank you for
Clark,
listening.
John Clark asks, what country is most likely to initiate a nuclear bomb?
But let me just take out my crystal ball. I would probably put my bets on North Korea. They seem to be the most, I don't know, unpredictable, I would say. That would be my suspicion. But I really don't know. I mean, the Ukrainian situation, the Soviets have at various times indicated they would consider using nuclear weapons. I don't know whether they would be that rash. And I think you know, Israel has always said it will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East, but depending on what happens with Iran and whether the recent confrontation only spurred Iran to work harder to get a nuclear weapon, or whether they're reconsidering it, is extremely hard for anybody to know at this point, I think.
I think what Russia has threatened is short-range tactical weapons.
That's correct. But the question that people say is, if you start with short-range tactical weapons, how quickly does it escalate? And the fear is that starting with short-range tactical weapons would not necessarily end there. It would just be the beginning. Like, how do you respond to that? Do you have exclusively a conventional response? That might be the response of NATO. You might be right.
I mean, the shame is on the United States and NATO that we have not honored our commitment to protect Ukraine, because we did. And when they initially invaded Crimea, we did absolutely nothing, basically. We had our own problems, but on the other hand, we ignored that. And if they had had nuclear weapons, maybe we wouldn't have this war. And that's what Zelensky keeps mentioning to people, that remember our commitment? Yeah, but nobody wants to pay attention to it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that is, I think, to be aware that there is that commitment. It's easy to forget it. And then whether you ignore it or not is, there's realpolitik, and politicians will do what politicians will do. So, I don't have any wisdom beyond what anybody else has on that, frankly.
And Kay said, is she saying that the reason Russia got into the nuclear race is that their spies at Los Alamos stole it? Probably, just like they're stealing all kinds of nuclear secrets.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if we're playing the game of if right now. First of all, when the American nuclear program and the Manhattan Project and Los Alamos was really just one there were two other major centers. One was Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and Hanford in Washington, state of Washington. And they were much bigger than Los Alamos. But the Einstein and Leo Szilard encouraged Roosevelt to start an aggressive nuclear arms program, because they were afraid that the Nazis were developing a nuclear weapon. And the guy who was at the head of the nuclear program in Germany was a guy they all knew. They had been including Oppenheimer, including Teller, including all these guys. They had met at conferences in Europe. And they knew how good he was. He was a very, very highly respected physicist. And so they were very scared. But the truth of the matter is that the Nazis never really invested seriously in a nuclear program. And the reason they didn't was because Hitler, in his arrogance, believed that it wouldn't be ready in time, that he would have conquered all of Europe by the time a bomb would be ready. So he didn't bother really investing in that. And so there really was never a particularly robust German nuclear program. And so if the Americans hadn't started, would the Russians have done it anyway? Who knows? Who knows? But I do think that the Soviet pursuit of nuclear weapons was stimulated by the Americans, for sure. Again, parity, we're back to parity. But it was at the beginning of the game, before there were 300 weapons that on both sides that could mutually destroy each other.
Do we have any other questions? Yay, nay? Well, then I have a comment to make. I think the most positive thing that I have heard about in the context of pilots and reports from the missile sites and things like that is that there have been reports of ships of some sort, of vessels of some sort over the missile sites that have turned off the ability to launch. Have you heard about those? I mean, periodically I follow Ancient Aliens and what's going on and all the reports it's finally getting to Congress, where they're having hearings on UFOs, or what they now call IA something or other. And I just keep thinking, well, maybe it's true. And maybe if we start something or somebody else starts something, there's enough of an investment in other species, other aliens, whether they're here or elsewhere, to stop it before we destroy the Earth. Because otherwise, one of these days it's going to happen, is my concern.
I think that that's certainly a concern, is that it really could happen. And again, the fear is that it would happen as much by accident as by intent. I think also, to me, as a taxpayer, I'd say the incredible amount of resources, $108,000 a minute for 30 years going into a nuclear arsenal. Like, do we really need to be, I'm not saying we don't need to spend anything, but do we need to be spending that level of money and resources on something so explicitly and definitely destructive? So that I think is, the question for the politicians, and I would urge us to question them on it. So that's kind of where we leave it. I'm sorry to not, I mean, I have to say that the idea that they'll extend it for a year is the best news I've heard in a long time. And the other thing I do want to stress is that if you look at kind of the history of the development of START and of SALT and START, it has been a bipartisan issue. In other words, it has been, some of the stuff was done by Reagan, some was done by Obama, but every president has both Republicans and Democrats, in a time that we're so divided about so many issues, the idea of nuclear restraint has been something that has been common to both sides of the aisle. And both sides of the aisle have contributed to SALT and to START, and hopefully will continue to do so. This is one thing where we're really, and the whole idea of, the attitude towards Russia, what was typically a Republican position on Russia is now a Democrat. I mean, so the whole attitude towards Russia and has changed. So there's enough. I'd say it's enough of a mix of positions that this just might be one issue where the bipartisan interest might be in really trying to get both sides of the aisle on it. And where it really breaks down in terms of who's for and who's is very often what kind of military installation you have in your state. I think it might be much more geographic, socioeconomic division than one on ideology here.
You have a number of people who said informative presentation, great brown bag, thank you. And
Great, thank you.
a suggestion that you please consider offering a class for OLLI. We'd love to have you do that rather than just a brown bag lunch, which you could also do if you'd like to do another. Would be interesting to hear your experiences in Israel at some time, or
Yeah, that's a whole different
subject. Yes.
But I do, if you do like historical novels, and for those of you who are, real nonfiction, give me the facts, that's not for you. But if you do like a good story and plot-driven stories, then I do hope that you would consider getting the novel. And if you do, please rate it. I mean, that's the amazing thing that you discover with editors, is what they want to know is, how many ratings you have on Amazon. Like, how's that going? They
You
want
already have one order, one individual has already made an order for your book.
Terrific. You made my day.
But we would be delighted to have you come back. I will send you the link to the brown bag lunch presentation and also
Great.
to our courses. And I want to let everybody know that as of next Monday, we are restarting the original concept behind the brown bag lunch program, which is the art of living, focusing on people who have made significant lifelong contributions to our community in a variety of ways. And one, because you see her in the paper all over the place, is Lynn McKenna. And it's the art of living a meaningful life of purpose. I've asked her to talk about herself, how she got involved in all these things and been so significant in making them happen. everything from the Redwood Coast Music Festival, the Humboldt County Walk to End Alzheimer's, the Humboldt sponsors, and the California retired teachers, among others. She has been, and why has she done all this? What has made it possible? How has she pulled it off? I said, what got you to do this, and what is making it work for you to do this for like the last 30 years or so? En route while losing her husband, and then, retiring, losing her husband, and all the things that she's done. So I've asked her to tell her story. And if this is successful and you like this, and you can suggest other people in the community or outside, we can invite them to do the same. So I want to thank you all for coming. This was a wonderful presentation, Galina.
Thank you for having me.
And it would be interesting to follow up with the concept of the wives who have no idea what their husbands are doing and how the husbands have managed to keep it quiet for all these years. I know this because my husband worked with restricted information regarding, for example, I know why we never bombed Syria's weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. And I happen to be here when he's working on all this, but he has passed away and I had to get rid of everything because of that. But people who are working like this and know this are dedicated to keeping it, doing their work, making it available for people continuing this work, whether it's getting rid of chemical and biological weapons or nuclear weapons, and they're devoted to making sure that it's kept quiet so we have the ability to address these things. The problem is when it's quiet like that, people don't know why decisions are made at the higher level because of the information they've gotten. If they bombed in a particular place, the spread of the weaponry could kill so many innocent people. So we don't do it. So we have a whole advisory system based on what we know about chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons that keeps us from using them or trying to stop them elsewhere. Anyway, it's interesting, and it would be interesting to follow up on why. I mean, now women are more involved in the chemistry and biology and so forth, physics, than they used to be. But a lot of wives had no idea what their husbands were doing.
Yeah, there were a few at Los Alamos. There were a few couples that when they were both scientists and they both worked on the project. I don't know of any case where it was a woman who came on her own and brought a spouse with her who wasn't involved.
Yeah,
that was much less common. But yeah, and I think I think the jury is out on whether having women involved changes the outcome.
I don't think it
There
does.
we go on these
Yeah,
things.
no.
I think it's, it would be nice.
Wives used to be accustomed to just going wherever their husbands went.
That I think has stopped. That was actually one of the issues that I had when writing it. My group says, well, you have to have Christine oppose more going. And I said, but this is like the 1940s. It's not like the 1990s or 2020. She's, her ability to oppose it is limited.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very, very much for having me. And best of luck.
We thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate your participation and your